Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, supervisors of Waupaca County.
Good morning.
Good morning. I will call this Waupaca County Board of Supervisors meeting to order on this Tuesday, August 18th. Please press your roll call buttons.
Roll call shows 27 members present.
Sell out. Clerk Robbins, has her open meeting declaration been properly posted and displayed? Thank you. Today, again, when we stand for a silent meditation prior to the pledge, please, let's remember Connie Albert. She's making great strides, but sure needs our prayers. Please stand. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. The agenda is before you, sent to you, you've studied it. Is there a motion for approval?
Motion.
It's a motion by Supervisor Peterson and a second by Supervisor Sorensen. Please vote.
Last chance to vote. Motion carries 27-0.
Likewise, the minutes are in front of you. There's a motion for approval by Darrell Handrick and a second by Mr. McClone. Any questions on the minutes? Seeing none, please vote.
Last chance to vote. Carried 27-0.
Today, as some of you have seen, we got actually a couple great guests. The first guest that I asked to come here before the county board is really a most valuable player at the Wisconsin Counties Association in Madison, Kyle Christensen. Most of you have known him. I've known him for a long time, and I was a part, when I was on the board of the organization that took Kyle to the Director of Government Affairs, where he manages the WC lobbyists and leads the lobbyists in Madison and also in Washington, D.C. Kyle provides regular updates to our WC board and to we counties who request him. And I always like to have Kyle here at least twice a year. You know, after the budget in Madison, we see, we hear, we read. And those are bits and pieces, but we don't get the whole story. This guy, I think, lives at the Capitol more than he does in his own home. He knows where the state was, where they are, and where we may be going, and how it affects the counties in every which way. Of course, all his news isn't good, but he's warning us what could happen with the next biennial budget. So I'm really happy to welcome our good friend, Kyle Christensen. Good morning, Kyle. Thanks for making the trip here.
Absolutely. Good morning.
Good morning.
Before I begin, I just want to say thank you to the county board and Chairman Keppen for inviting us. Especially after a state budget every 2 years, a lot of counties come forward and say, can you come talk to us and give us kind of an overview of what happened As the chairperson alluded to, you read the media reports, but to be honest, a lot of that's pretty high level, and they don't talk about county-specific issues or how we arrived at those issues. So today what we're going to do is just give an overview, kind of from 30,000 feet. We'll talk about a general overview of the budget. Here's the process. Here's how it happened. We'll talk about the bad. There was bad. And then we'll talk about the good. There was good. A lot of people ask us after the budget, how would you characterize this state budget for counties? And I think the best way to characterize this is a mixed bag. There are some really good things that we'll talk about, and there are a few really bad things. Now, unlike prior budgets where the bad things were funding cuts to shared revenue of 20 or 30%, or cuts to road aids of 10 to 20%, we don't see that anywhere in this budget. This budget really doesn't reduce aids to counties hardly anywhere, which is great. What's concerning, though, for WCA and should be concerning for all of you is this ongoing attempt, and it's not just Republicans, it's not just Democrats, it's both of them, this ongoing attempt over the last 10 or 20 years to erode local control. For legislators in Madison to tell you how you should do your zoning, tell you how you should do your wind siting, tell you how you should do A, B, or C. And I don't think it matters who you talk to when legislators run for office to say, I believe in local control because decisions made at the local level where people are closest to the people are where they should be made. Unfortunately, that's not kind of the direction that we've taken. So while there is good, there is also bad. I would characterize as mostly in the area of local control.
I think if you just click it towards the
Should work. Okay. Just as an overview, the governor signed the budget about a month ago. I think it was no surprise to anybody that the day after he signed the budget, he announced his candidacy for president. And he's been a very busy guy since, running all around the country. Before signing the budget, however, the governor did issue vetoes, which we'll talk about. There were some items that we had asked for to be vetoed that he did veto, other items he did not, some items that we had asked to be included in the budget. We were successful in having the legislature do so, but then he vetoed later. But before we get into it, I think it's important to talk about kind of the budget landscape, kind of the situation that we were facing heading into the 2015-17 state budget. So first, you have a governor for, which is pretty rare in the state, who is actively running for president in the United States. And I think it's safe to say that when you're running for president, you don't want a whole lot of distractions back home, number one. And two, you're not as involved or as engaged as you might otherwise be. I think in Governor Walker's first two budgets, if you recall 11-13 budget, we had Act 10. I think he was incredibly involved, incredibly engaged. This time, I don't think anybody would argue that he wasn't nearly as engaged as he was before. And I think you see that when you look at the governor's top priorities. In an earlier presentation that we were doing when the budget was introduced, we identified the governor as kind of 8 big ticket items in the budget. And typically a governor gets 70 to 75% of whatever he asks for if his party's in control, which we have right now, or with Republicans controlling both the governor's office and both houses of the legislature. This wasn't really the case. Some of the big items that the governor had proposed, countywide assessment, big changes to family care and ADRCs, big changes to the school choice program, a lot of the big items that the governor proposed didn't happen. And that's a little unusual, but I think it's a testament to maybe some other things going on and the governor really just not being here as much as he probably would have been had he not been running for president. The other thing that we have and kind of faced here for the last few legislative sessions is we have arguably the most anti-tax, anti-spend legislature in state history. Right now, Republicans control more seats in the state legislature than in any year since 1957. And when I put this on here, I'm not trying to characterize this as good or bad, but it's a fact. They are one of the most anti-tax, anti-spend legislatures that any of us have ever seen. The reason that can be difficult for us is that as counties, we rely on taxes and state aids to provide the services that the local residents expect us to provide. So you have a legislature that's hesitant to allow us to increase property taxes and also hesitant to increase spending, which would result in more money in the counties. That's a challenge that we were facing. The other difficulty was subpar revenue growth. So the Legislative Fiscal Bureau in December puts out, in December before the governor introduced his budget, they put out revenue estimates. They say, here's how many new dollars you have to spend in the next state budget. Then they come back in January again, and they said, well, we've had a month, we've looked at national forecasts, and here are the numbers that you should prepare your budget with, Governor. So he does so. Then typically what happens is when we get to May, the Fiscal Bureau again looks at it. So the governor's budget's already been introduced, the Finance Committee has started their work on it. They get to May, and then they re-estimate revenues again. So if you recall the last budget, the 2013-15 budget, where counties saw aid increases in a lot of different programs, one of the reasons for that was because between January and May, the Fiscal Bureau found about $800 million in new revenue. So the governor had released his budget, here's what I want to spend money on, the Finance Committee was working on it, and all of a sudden $800 million got dropped in their lap. There were a lot of people hopeful that the same thing would happen again this time. We were seeing subpar revenue growth in what the Fiscal Bureau was expecting in January. They said, you're going to have about 2 or 3% more money than you had last time, which isn't great. And a lot of legislators thought, well, what we'll do is we'll take some of the smaller items up first in the budget, and then we'll wait till May, and hopefully in May we'll have a windfall and we can solve our major problems like Medicaid, transportation, school funding, UW system problems, UW system funding. We can do all that in May. Well, unfortunately, when the Fiscal Bureau came back in May, they said, we're not going to change our estimates. In fact, if we were going to adjust them at all, we'd probably lower them. But we know that that would put you guys in a really tough spot. So we think we're within probably a 0.5%, 1%, but you're not going to have any more money. So the legislature was faced with all these big ticket items that they had no way to fund and no more revenue to spend on those items. In this budget, you had a very unusual month-long delay. So the Finance Committee took up a bunch of items, then they went home for a month. And the reason for it was they couldn't agree how to fund transportation. The governor had said, I will not sign any transportation taxes or fee increases unless they're offset with tax cuts somewhere else. When you don't have any money, you can't do tax cuts. The Assembly had said, we want to do registration fee increase because it's not a tax, it's not the gas tax. And the state Senate said, we don't feel comfortable voting for a tax increase when the governor is going to veto it. So you had a real stalemate for a long time. What ended up happening was the Finance Committee, the legislature did not go with Governor Walker's plan. Essentially, they delayed and borrowed additional funding for transportation, which we'll get into. The other kind of elephant in the room, and this has been the case for 3 or 4 budgets, is Medicaid. Medicaid required nearly half of all new revenues. So when the Fiscal Bureau came in January and said, here's how much more money you have, it looked like a big dollar amount, but half of it was going to Medicaid. And that wasn't for any new programs, wasn't for any new services. That was simply, in order for Medicaid and the Department of Health Services to continue doing what they were doing, they needed about $700–800 million. So half the new revenues already devoted to Medicaid. Then finally, because of the fiscal situation the state was in, spending cuts were required to balance the state budget. I think this was one of the highlights, and as we go through, I hope you see it, where there were a lot of spending cuts in this budget. Schools took a hit. The UW system took a $250 million hit. State agencies took big hits, lost a number of employees, but counties really didn't take any cuts. And then finally, we have a deficit approaching $1 billion in the state transportation fund. This has been an ongoing problem where the legislature and the governor continually say, this is a problem, we need to address it, we know what the problems are, but they don't get around to doing it. Last November, Secretary Gottlieb of the Department of Transportation put out a very bold plan. It called for significant tax and fee increases for transportation. It called for new funding for almost all transportation programs. Got everybody really excited. The governor kind of seemed open to it. And then a few weeks later, he said, we're not doing this. We're not going to raise taxes and fees for transportation. And that plan was kind of dead on arrival. So general overview of the budget. What are some of the major budget highlights? We have the expansion of the voucher and charter school programs. We have a $250 million cut to the UW system, which will result in significant cuts to UW Extension. I believe the biggest cuts to Extension in state history. There is no long-term solution to transportation funding. This budget does hold the line on property taxes, and there is major prevailing wage reform at the state level and repeal for local governments as of January 1st of 2017. So by the numbers, this budget spends about $73 billion over 2 years. Total spending is up 3.8% over the prior budget. This is a number that I like to remind legislators of, so I say, you know, it's important that you guys put in perspective how you treat local governments. Because right now we have levy limits, which mean we really can't raise our taxes more than maybe 1 or 2% per year. That's about the max. I don't think you have really any county in the state raising their spending 4%. Yet the state legislature, who's there telling you, you can't raise taxes, you guys spend too much, you're out of control, they're increasing their spending almost 4% a year. We also have a structural deficit or imbalance approaching $500 million heading into the next budget, and there is a reduction of 418 state employee positions. About half these positions are currently unfilled, so people aren't necessarily losing their jobs, but about 200 of them are. This was a little bit different than past state budgets in that usually when the legislature wants to eliminate state employee positions, what they do is they go to an agency and they say, you need to cut 10%. So find 10% of your workforce and get rid of them. This was different in that in a lot of areas the legislature told them who to get rid of. They targeted the cuts. And I think the one that got the most attention was probably at DNR with the scientists. The legislature was unhappy with some of the climate change work that the DNR scientists had done. And they said, DNR, we want you to lose some employees, but we want to make sure these people go for sure. So that was a little bit unusual, not something that you typically see during a state budget. When we talk about a structural deficit or structural imbalance, the best way to think of this is what have you promised but not paid for? So one example, and a big one that we've seen over recent years, is the phase-in of tax cuts. So they say in 2 years we are going to eliminate a certain tax. Well, that doesn't cost you any money today. But 2 years from now it does because you don't have as much revenue coming in. So essentially you have an unfunded liability. And what we see here, these red bars, these numbers are millions. Going back to 1997 when the Fiscal Bureau started calculating this, we've had a deficit heading into every state budget except for the 2013-15 budget. That was Governor Walker's second budget. Then we went back to the structural imbalance, and then the next budget we're approaching a $500 million structural deficit. What that means is that, let's say the Fiscal Bureau next January comes back, or 2 Januaries from now, and says, okay, you have $1 billion in revenue growth. Okay, well, 490 million of that has to go for things you already promised for. You can't spend that on new programs or new policies. That's just to pay for the things you did in the past. So essentially, you're in a hole heading into the next state budget. Budget timeline, it really started last July when the governor released his budget instructions to state agencies. They submitted those requests in September. They were published in November. Then the night of February 3rd, Governor Walker introduced his budget. And when it was introduced, a lot of people in Madison thought, well, we have Republicans in the legislature. We have Governor Walker as a Republican. We have Governor Walker wanting to run for president. This budget could be done quick. And there were hopes that it could actually be done by Memorial Day. Now, statutorily, the state budget is required to be signed by June 30th. However, if it's not signed by then, unlike the federal government where you have a shutdown, the state continues operating on the old appropriation schedule. So people were hopeful we were going to have a nice long summer in Madison, be done by Memorial Day. Unfortunately, when we got to Memorial Day, then we took the month break. And the legislature came back the very end of June, early July, and the budget was signed, I believe, July 11th by the governor. Another surprising thing in this budget was the governor's employment of the veto pen. So the governor has one of the strongest vetoes in the country. If you recall, a few years ago, there was a constitutional amendment to get rid of what was called the Vanna White veto, where he could actually delete letters and make new words. The citizens of this state said, yeah, that's probably not a great idea. We won't let him do that. But still, the governor has pretty impressive veto authority compared to his counterparts around the country, and he used it. These are the 3 state budgets that Governor Walker has introduced and signed. In 11-13 and 13-15, as you can see, he had about 50 vetoes, 50 and 57, a pretty nominal amount. This budget, there were 104 of them. Again, this was surprising not only because he really hadn't vetoed a whole lot of stuff in the first 2 budgets, But again, you have complete control. His party had complete control of the legislature, and he had other things on his mind. So the 104 vetoes was relatively surprising. Unlike prior budgets where the governor's office would take veto meetings and they would give you a call and say, well, here's what we're doing a day before they release the budget. They didn't do any of that this time. They said, we're not doing any veto meetings. We're not going to give you any heads up, and you're going to read the vetoes like everybody else. So a lot of lobbyists in Madison were saying, we've never seen this kind of thing before. And it was very frustrating for a lot of folks. So some of the county-related vetoes of interest. One was an exemption for the bed tax. Right now there are 3 facilities in the state that are either institutes for mental disease, they deal with the severe mental health cases, or they have state-only licenses, but they're also typically reserved for some of the most serious cases of mental health. Those 3 facilities are in Dodge, La Crosse, and Trempealeau counties. So what we had asked for was an exemption from the bed tax for these facilities. A lot of people said, well, it's only 3 counties. But it's not, because every county in the state, including Waupaca County, sends individuals to one of these 3 facilities. These facilities are charged the bed tax. Now, the bed tax is $170 per bed per month, and is intended to draw down additional federal funding. So by the nursing home paying the bed tax, it draws down federal dollars. The nursing home essentially gets reimbursed for their bed tax cost. And then the state skims about $15 million of it. So it's a pretty good deal. The unfortunate thing is that these 3 entities, because they're an IMD or have only a state-only license, not a federal license, they don't qualify for the bed tax. So they're charged the bed tax, but they can't use any of those dollars. They never come back to them. So when you place an individual in Trempealeau County, you're paying $170 per bed per month for that individual that had that facility been able to receive federal dollars, you wouldn't have been charged. So we asked for an exemption from that. For whatever reason, the governor did veto that. He said we shouldn't be giving exemptions for certain entities over the other. But again, because they didn't take veto meetings, you couldn't explain a lot of this stuff to them. But that was an unfortunate veto. Then there was a levy limit exemption. There was a provision in the budget that would have allowed counties to retain additional levy limit authority following a merging of services. So right now, if a county merges its services with another county, there's 2 levy limit reductions made. The county that takes on the service gets an adjustment to pay for it. The county that gives it up, though, has to reduce their levy, and it's 1 for 1. So you transfer a service to another county, let's say the service costs $100,000. You have to lower your levy by $100,000. That other county can increase theirs by $100,000. That's not a whole lot of incentive to drop a service. The state talks about we need to consolidate services, we need to merge services, we need to have economies of scale. We have to incentivize it some way. What this provision would have done is it would have allowed you to retain some of that levy limit authority. So it was a $100,000 service, you could have kept $50,000. And it would have been more of an incentive for localities to merge services. Then there was a sales tax exemption that the governor vetoed. Right now, if a county has a building project, they're forced to buy all the materials for that building project themselves if they want it to be exempt from sales tax. So in Waupaca County a few years ago, they were building a new human services building. They had 68 contractors, and Waupaca County was essentially buying all the materials for that building and all those contractors to avoid the sales tax. Well, we know in a lot of counties you don't have the staff or resources to do that. You just tell the contractor, go buy what you need, we'll pay the sales tax, and it is what it is. This would have allowed contractors to use the county's sales tax exempt certificate to buy the products. This is something we've been working on for probably almost 2 decades, trying to get this done. Unfortunately, we had a veto commitment from the governor. He said, no, I'm fine with this. But when it was drafted, the Department of Revenue drafted it too broadly, and they actually thought, we have some unintended consequences here. So the governor vetoed this provision, but in his veto message said, I support this idea. You guys need to run another bill, make sure it's narrow, and I'll sign it. So that's something right now we're working with Senator Mark Klein in the state Senate on getting drafted and introduced. Then a veto that we had requested related to inspection-related fees. There was a provision in the budget that would have froze inspection fees at their current levels until the end of this budget. So an example of that are restaurant inspections, where the county, on behalf of the state, does inspections at restaurants and other health facilities. This would have froze the fees that we could have charged. So we're doing the service on behalf of the state, but then the state's saying, well, you can't raise your fees. The governor did veto this, so you are able to raise your inspection fees when you're doing those services. So some of the county by county impacts in the budget, kind of the bad and the good. We'll start with the bad. While there weren't major cuts to any county programs, there was one cut. There is a $4 million one-time reduction in county and municipal recycling grants in this program. So right now there's about $19 million that county and municipalities get in grants from the state for recycling. In year one of the budget, it goes from $19 to $15 million, and then the next year goes back up to $19 million. So there is a $4 million cut. About 80% of that goes to municipalities. But if there are any cuts to county programs in this budget, this is the one. Probably the most concerning item to WCA are the changes to shoreland zoning included in the budget. Essentially, prior to the budget being signed into law, you had NR 115, which was an administrative rule developed by DNR. It was developed over about 6 or 7 years with input from counties, towns, realtors, landowners, a wide variety of stakeholders. They got together and they said, okay, what kind of standards should we have for shoreland zoning? So they came up with NR 115. And NR 115 was the floor, which means you could do whatever you want with shoreland zoning, but you couldn't be less restrictive than NR 115. They said, we need some standards, and you should have at least this, but if you want to go more, if you have water quality issues in your lakes or streams and you want to be more restrictive, go ahead and do it. Well, Representative Jarko from northern Wisconsin, an attorney, freshman legislator, he was in his private practice representing a lot of landowners in northern Wisconsin who felt their property rights were being diminished by some of the county zoning practices. So he came forward with a budget amendment through Senator Tiffany and Representative Loudenbeck that essentially said, you guys like NR 115? NR 115 is no longer going to be the floor. And it's not going to be the ceiling either. NR 115 is going to be the standard. So no more discretion at the local level. You can't decide what kind of shoreline zoning standards you have, regardless of water type, water quality, regardless of what the residents that live in the shoreline want. Your standard is going to be NR 115. So it's a complete preemption of local control and local decision making. We worked very hard to try to make changes to this. We felt confident that Senator Coles in the state Senate would be our champion to get this removed. We thought at the time that they needed his vote to pass the state budget. Some of the background, it had looked for a long time like prevailing wage wasn't going to happen. You had 2 senators in the state Senate that said, I will not vote for the budget unless prevailing wage is repealed. The indications were they didn't have the votes for months. Because of that, Senator Coles is sitting on the other side, and we thought, well, he'll be the deciding vote then. They'll need to get Senator Coles' vote, and he had told legislative leadership, in order for me to vote for this budget, the shoreline zoning stuff needs to come out. Unfortunately, what happened was prevailing wage discussions kind of took off. There were hearings held. Milwaukee Talk Radio kind of got louder and louder and louder. Prevailing wage happens. The 2 senators that said we won't vote for the budget without prevailing wage flip. They're going to vote for it. All of a sudden, they don't need Senator Coles' vote. So the one item that he says I need for the budget to pass, they no longer need his vote, and shoreline zoning stayed in the budget. We did make a big push as well to go to the governor's office and try to have our folks call them and have discussions about him at least scaling this back somewhat. He was not receptive to that. So right now, NR 115 is the shoreline zoning standard. We are working with our legal team to try to find out if there's any other mechanisms for dealing with this issue. There was some talk about, could you use your general zoning to set some standards in the shoreland? We don't think that's a possibility, but we do have, I think, 3 or 4 attorneys looking into this right now to see what exactly are the options that counties have when it comes to land use, planning, and zoning in the shoreland. Conditional use permits, this isn't really applicable here, but the budget preempts counties from requiring additional insurance for oil pipelines if the pipeline company carries general liability insurance. This gets at the Enbridge pipeline, which is running from northern Wisconsin all the way down the state, where they want to expand capacity through that pipeline. They had approval all the way to the state, all the way through the state until they got to Dane County. And Dane County says, we will give you a conditional use permit to increase your pumping station size, but you need to carry an additional insurance policy. And Enbridge was unhappy with it. There were a number of legislators unhappy with it. And what they did in the budget was they preempted it. They said, nope, you can't require additional insurance on an oil pipeline, which again was targeted at Dane County and the Enbridge pipeline. Then we have coroner fees. The budget restricts the ability of counties to increase coroner or medical examiner related fees. This is another issue that we've been hearing a lot about. This came from the funeral home directors. And there's two components to this provision. First, it says for indigent individuals, for low-income individuals, you can no longer charge coroner or medical examiner related fees. Now, some counties waived these fees anyways, others did not, but under the state budget, you can't charge those individuals' fees. The other piece of it, though, so the Finance Committee passed that, then they came back and the funeral home directors said, well, if we don't let them charge fees for low-income people, they're just going to increase fees for everybody else. And we don't want that either. So then they said, well, for 2 years, you can't raise your fees for all individuals, your coroner or medical examiner related fees. And after that, you can only raise them with inflation. And the way it was originally drafted, it said your fees are locked as to the amount that they are on the day that the budget signed into law. So this happened April 17th, and a lot of counties looked at that and they said, well, we have a few months, we could increase our coroner and medical examiner fees because we're going to be locked in for 2 years anyways, we'll increase them. And a number of counties did that. The legislature took note. They came back the last day of finance and said, we're going to cap your fees, but we're going to make it retroactive to April 17th of 2015. So you had a lot of counties that went through the hassle of increasing their fees, and really it didn't do a whole lot for them. This is another issue that we have the legal folks looking at to try to see if there's any wiggle room for counties, but at this time it appears that fees for coroner and medical examiner services are froze for 2 years. Then finally, there is a provision in the budget that required local governments to add additional information on property tax bills relating to referendum and their impacts on individual homeowners. This was something in the governor's budget. We were surprised by it because it further complicated the property tax bill. There was no money to update our software or vendor agreements or to account for counties' time and having to collect this information and add it to the tax bill, which is already pretty full. So we went to the governor's office and we said, where did this come from? They said, well, it came from a legislator. This isn't really our thing. Well, come to find out, it came from Assembly Speaker Robin Voss, who is arguably the most influential person in the state legislature as Speaker of the Assembly. And he said, yeah, I want to do this. We went through why we thought this was a problem, software changes. The last time we made big changes to the property tax bill, it cost a few $100,000 in some counties, and we thought these costs would be similar. So the Finance Committee came back. They did scale it back. So on property tax bills now, you have to have a separate listing for all the non-recurring referenda passed over the past year. So if your school district passed a referendum, you have to show which district it was, when they passed the referendum, when the referenda expires, and then the amount of it. In addition, you have to then calculate how much does a single taxpayer pay for that referenda based on their property value. So there's some work, there's some programming, there's some software changes that need to be done. After the budget passed, we heard from a lot of county treasurers and board chairs saying, we understand this provision is law, and we're going to do it, we're going to make it work. But we're a little concerned with the budget going into July, the Department of Revenue still not putting out any guidance. We're concerned about being able to do it for December. And we only have a few months here to get this work done. So we looked into it, and what we found out was that the Department of Revenue, unbeknownst to a lot of us, actually had the power, or has the power, to grant waivers. So we submitted a waiver. The first one was on behalf of 61 counties. We had heard from 61 counties. They said, yeah, we want a waiver. We submitted that to the Department of Revenue, talked to the governor's office, talked to the majority leader in the Senate and the Assembly Speaker, and what we were asking for is a 1-year waiver. We can do this, but in order to get the changes made, in order for us to test it for accuracy, we really think we should have another year to do this. And the Department of Revenue, for only the second time in their history, did grant the waiver request. So following that, we reached out to the remaining 11 counties, got their permission to seek a waiver on their behalf, and the Department of Revenue just last week granted that as well. So while this provision is going to take some time and effort on our part, it is not applicable to tax bills mailed this December, but it will be for the December following. So that's kind of the bad of the budget. Are there any questions to this point? Okay, so let's look at some of the good. And we have this organized kind of by issue area. So in the issue of health and human services, one of the big items is the budget doubles the amount of funding counties receive to fight fraud in the Medicaid and food share programs. So these are state and federal programs. So you may be saying, well, we get more money to fight fraud, but what's the impact for us? When we collect fraud, we actually get to keep a percentage of that. Depending on if it's a federal or state program, it ranges from 25 to 40%. But when we collect fraud dollars, we actually get to retain a portion. So the budget actually doubles the amount of money that counties receive to fight fraud. In addition, as you recall, the governor's proposed budget essentially called for a takeover of the ADRCs, or the Aging and Disability Resource Centers. Right now, counties have right of first refusal. If they want to provide all the ADRC services, they can do that, and that's their prerogative. The governor's budget would have said, well, no, not really. Anybody can do them. That was a big concern for us, as well as the governor's proposed changes to family care, where he was going to go essentially to a statewide system, remove the county role in a number of different areas. Both the ADRC changes and the family care changes were not adopted by the legislature, which we were very, very pleased about. On the family care front, however, the state is moving ahead with some waiver requests to the federal government. Right now, the Department of Health Services does not know exactly what those waiver requests are going to look like, what changes they want to make, but that's something we're watching very closely. So what we've been telling folks on family care is we dodged a big bullet here, but the gun is still loaded. That there's going to be further discussion on this issue, and something we're watching very closely. The nursing home funding, the budget does provide a 1% increase in funding to nursing homes. And again, family care changes, as we discussed, were scaled back significantly by the state legislature. In the area of tax and finance, again, shared revenue, there were no reductions to shared revenue in this state budget. Again, this isn't great news in that we're always looking for more money from the state, but it is good news if you look at the total perspective, where you had a UW system that took a $250 million cut. You're cutting education, you're cutting state agencies, you're cutting state programs, but you don't cut one of the largest state programs, which is shared revenue counties and municipalities. Also, countywide assessment. As I'm sure you're all aware, the governor's budget included a provision that would have mandated a transition to countywide assessment. We are not necessarily opposed to countywide assessment. We were opposed to this plan, though, because we felt like counties were going to be left holding the bag for it. Who's going to pay for it? They said, well, when we received a call from the Department of Revenue a day before the budget was released, they said, we're going to have a countywide assessment proposal in the budget. And we would ask that you guys not kick and scream about it until you come talk to us. And I said, well, that's kind of a big ask. I mean, are people going to be upset? He said, no, but it's funded. It's funded. I said, well, then we can talk about it. Well, the plan came out, and it wasn't funded at all. It wasn't even close to funded. And there were provisions in there where they were going to require us to hire certain staff to staff our county assessment offices, but then they were going to decide how much those staff made, and they were also going to decide how many staff we needed. So there are big problems with that provision. We adamantly opposed it along with the Wisconsin Towns Association, and the very first thing the legislature's budget writing committee, the finance committee, did when they met was remove the countywide assessment proposal from the budget. I have been in conversations with the Department of Revenue about the property tax waiver, and of course they're not overly pleased with us about killing their countywide assessment proposal, but they did tell me we're not going to try that again. So typically that comes back about every 10 years where a new administration comes in. They said we should really do countywide assessment and find some efficiencies in the system, but in all likelihood we're not going to see it, at least for the remainder of this administration. Then again, levy limits. Levy limits are left pretty much unchanged. We're still restricted to growth in property values due to net new construction, which those numbers just came out. You're looking at about 1.2%. So on average, counties can increase their levy a little over a percentage, with some exceptions to that. One thing we did get there, though, was an adjustment to the carry forward provision. or the use it or lose it provision, as we call it. Essentially what this provision in state law is that if you don't tax to the maximum allowed under levy limits, you're punished in future years with reduced levy capacity. So there's an incentive to state law. You should tax all the way to the max, because if you don't, you can't go back and grab that unused tax capacity. Essentially, state law only allowed you to carry over 1.5% in a given year. We had that changed so you can actually carry over 5% from one year to the next, and you can build up that 5% over 5 years. So it makes the provision a little bit better. Transportation. This is probably the biggest issue in the state budget for us and a lot of other groups. So as I mentioned, the DOT secretary had put out a proposal that we were all pretty happy about. It was going to be more money for transportation and county transportation. The governor said, no, we're not doing that, so it was dead on arrival. So what the governor proposed was an additional $1.3 billion in bonding or borrowing for transportation. This was a major concern for us. Right now, debt service is about 19% of the transportation fund. So for every dollar that comes in the state through gas tax registration fees, about 19 cents of that goes just to pay for debt service, for things we've already done. If the legislature would have agreed to the $1.3 billion in bonding proposed by the governor, that number would have reached 25%. Now, not that long ago, about 8 years ago, we were at 7% debt service. So we were going to go from 7 to 25%, which was a big concern. The other piece of it, which is kind of detailed, but the borrowing was concerning for us for two other reasons. One, you can't use borrowed or bonded dollars to maintain your streets. The state can't borrow for you to plow snow in the winter. They can't do that. When you borrow for something, you have to build something. You have to have a structure. You have to build a new road. You have to build a new bridge. That's what borrowing is for. So of that $1.3 billion in new borrowing, we can't use that for local or state road maintenance. We need real dollars, real cash for that. The second piece of it, though, is that the dollars we can use are generated from the registration fees and the gas tax dollars. Those are real money. That's what we can use to maintain our streets. Well, if 25 cents of every dollar in gas tax and registration fees are devoted to debt service, there's no money left for us. So we had big concerns with this, as did really all transportation stakeholders in the state. We called this unacceptable. Unfortunately, the legislature did not go with the governor's plan. Rather, they cut about $800 million of the transportation fund. It was about a 13% reduction that the legislature passed on to DOT. Why that's important is that the second largest program in the Department of Transportation's budget is aids to local governments. You have a lot of programs, but the second largest is aids to local governments. So they cut 13% out of the transportation budget, but didn't touch local aids. So think about it, the county perspective, you need to cut 13% out of your budget, but your second largest expenditure you can't touch. And that was really a testament, not necessarily to legislative leadership, because there was a plan to have counties eat about $200 million of the cut, about a fourth of it, 25%. But really, a lot of legislators stood up in caucus and said, with this budget, I'm not going home to my local folks and telling them that their road aids are cut. So about $800 million reduction in transportation. Counties don't see any of it. Mass transit operating aids, again, no reduction there. In fact, the last budget included a 4% increase as a one-time increase for both general transportation aids. Those are the dollars that we receive to maintain our system. There was a 4% one-time increase in the last budget for that and for transit. The governor in his budget did include continuing that 4% increase. So we will see that 4% increase in the next 2 years. Same thing with transit aids. Elderly and disabled transportation aids, there was actually a 1% increase in this program. There was a repeal of Trans 75, which is a DOT administrative rule. And then there was an issue with culverts. So the budget allows counties to replace existing culverts without state permits and associated fees. This is a big item for our highway guys. I'm sure, Dean, you guys have seen this issue here. We had heard stories where you had culverts in towns where the town knew that the culvert was going to fail. But rather than having to go to the state and get all the permitting and all the fees and go through all the red tape, they would actually let the culvert collapse, because then it's an emergency situation, the county can just come and replace it. So what this budget does is it alleviates that by just allowing counties, we can replace existing culverts if they're in roughly the same location, roughly the same diameter. We can simply do that on our system and for other local governments without any associated state permits or fees. Environment and land use, POUTs, private on-site wastewater treatment systems. If you recall, these are septic tanks. If you recall, the governor's budget made significant changes to this program. One, he proposed eliminating funding to the Wisconsin Fund. The Wisconsin Fund provides grants to low-income homeowners who have failing septic systems. So I'm a low-income homeowner, my septic system fails, I have to pay to replace that. But after I do so, I can then apply to the Wisconsin Fund for a grant to offset the cost. And typically these grants range from anywhere to 25 to 40%. Every county in the state has individuals applying to the Wisconsin Fund for partial reimbursement for their septic systems. The governor had proposed eliminating that program and the associated about $4 or $5 million a year in funding for the program. The other thing the governor had proposed was moving POUTs from the Department of Safety and Professional Services to the Department of Natural Resources. WCA's worked for about 2 decades to keep POUTs, or septic system regulation, outside of DNR. What we've told our folks, and we told the legislature, is you can put it anywhere, but don't put it under DNR. The governor did propose moving it to DNR. Fortunately, we retained the regulation in DSPS, and we retained funding for the Wisconsin Fund. So this is a big concern for a lot of counties. Fortunately, the legislature did not go with the governor's proposed elimination of the fund. Conservation staffing grants, the budget provides additional funding, about $700,000 for county conservation staff. These are staff that are partly paid for by state dollars and county dollars that work with farmers and other landowners to reduce runoff, other types of pollution controls. Again, about $700,000 additional funding for this program. Then the budget provides a one-time increase in dollars county receives from managed forest law land payments. So right now, if land is enrolled in managed forest law, essentially you get a big tax break. And it depends whether they have the land open to the public or closed. Under current law, if I have land enrolled in the program and it's open, then I pay a fee, and that fee goes to the town that my land is in and the county. If it's closed, however, all that money goes directly to the state. So counties receive no dollars for land being taken off the tax rolls. This budget takes $1 million in each year and says, counties and towns, you guys can have it for land enrolled in the MFL program. County organization and personnel, just a few items we'll touch on here. Property insurance. The governor had proposed eliminating the local government property insurance fund, which I believe we had 69 counties last year in the fund. I would imagine Waupaca County was one of them. There were a number of problems with the fund. Essentially, it was about $20 million underwater, partly due from legislative meddling and really not good management of the fund. So the governor had proposed eliminating it. But when the state Senate went to the floor to vote on the budget, they introduced an amendment, and one of the amendments in there was retaining the property insurance fund. So the property insurance fund is seeing significant increases in their rates. We're looking anywhere from 50 to 75%. But the fund will remain, and private sector competitors will now enter the marketplace and compete with the local government property insurance fund. The other issue was county veteran service officer grants. The budget makes all counties eligible for these grants. These grants range from $8,000 to $13,000, depending on your county size. And the Department of Veterans Affairs was looking at this, and what they found was that a lot of counties hadn't hired their CVSO in accordance with civil service practices. A lot of counties weren't aware that they had to do it. So DVA came out and they said, well, if you didn't do this, then we're not going to give you a grant ever again. So we worked with the governor's office directly and said, we really don't think this is how it should be. I think we should grandfather all the counties in, change some of the criteria for the program. We did that, and all counties are made eligible for the County Veteran Service Officer grants this year and in following years. Then finally, the budget repeals prevailing wage for local governments. Again, this is effective January 1st of 2017. People asked us, why isn't it just immediately effective? Really, this was a case of garnering votes in the legislature, and some folks felt uncomfortable with not giving contractors enough lead-up time for this. So it'll be January 1st of 2017. in addition to repealing it for local governments, there is also significant changes at the state level. While the threshold levels where prevailing wage applies will remain, they're essentially federalizing the process. So rather than having contractors fill out surveys that here's how much we pay our employees and then them calculating the prevailing wage, the state is just going to use the federal data for that. So they simplified the process and again eliminated prevailing wage for local governments. So that's kind of the review that we have. As far as what's next, the fall legislative session is quickly approaching. We don't expect a whole lot of action this fall. Again, we don't think the governor wants a whole lot of distractions out on the campaign trail back in Wisconsin. The two items that we think we're going to see is significant reform to the Government Accountability Board, or the election watchdog in the state. There will be changes to that. That'll be one of the top priorities of the legislature. In addition, there'll be a corrections package. One item in particular that we're looking at there is an effort to take first-time nonviolent 17-year-old offenders and move them back to the juvenile justice system. As some of you may recall, in the 1990s, you had this tough-on-crime wave where we built a bunch of prisons. And what we did at that time was we took all 17-year-olds and threw them in the adult system. What the research has since shown, though, is that those individuals have much better outcomes if they're in the juvenile system, where they get better services, they get in-home counseling services, all kinds of services that they're not able to get if they're in the adult system. So there's been a big push to bring them back to the juvenile system, which we're completely supportive of. However, you got to pay for it. Right now, our price tag on it, and it's an estimate, is right around $20 million a year. So we have opposed these efforts over the last 2 years to bring 17-year-olds back because they haven't had adequate funding. But this is definitely a fight we're going to have again this fall when the legislature takes up a pretty overarching corrections reform package. So I think that's kind of what I have, unless any of you have any questions.
Questions for Kyle? Dwayne?
Kyle, what do you see long-term potentially?
Microphone, please.
Kyle, what do you see long-term potentially for the legislative or the governor to get additional revenues for transportation?
I think it's difficult. You have a state senate right now that's very conservative. It's actually becoming more conservative. You just had a special election there, so there's a resistance to tax and fee increases there. The governor has pretty much flat out said, I'm opposed to new taxes or fees for transportation. Find efficiencies, find other ways to do it. So I think in the short term, it's very difficult. And I can tell you, legislators don't know what they're going to do either. Everybody acknowledges there's a problem. Everybody acknowledges that our roads have went from top 10 in the country to mid-pack. They acknowledge that. They just don't know how to pay for it. There was an effort this time to possibly have locals adopt an additional half-cent sales tax, maybe do it that way. That didn't happen, but that bill is still alive. I could see them doing something like that where they can't make the decision to raise taxes or fees, but they'll make locals do it. That may be a way for them to kick the can down the road, but we have a fundamental problem in the state, and really they have no plan as to what they're going to do. They've had study commissions. There was the Transportation Finance and Policy Commission, which came out with a salad bar of options, and the legislature said, no, we don't want any of those. So people know the options, people know the problem, but they really have no appetite to fix it at this point.
Supervisor Craig?
I wanted to remark on the fact that our department heads, when there was something in the budget that they felt we should contact our legislators about, did a good job of telling us to, contact Madison. Could you address how important is it for individual county board members, if your office or someone else says, please let your legislators know, is it really effective?
Yeah, it really is incredibly effective, and I don't think a lot of county or town folks really realize how effective it can be. If a legislator gets 3 or 4 calls on the same issue from a local constituent, that is a huge, huge deal. I mean, it's almost crisis mode in the legislature. You can see it when we put out an action alert and we walk into the office and the legislator says, what in the world are you guys doing? What are you doing? They're very nervous. And they're nervous for a few reasons. One, this body, the members of this body are local leaders. And you're always a potential challenger in an election. They're always worried about that. But more so, they're worried about the coffee shop talk. If they're not responding to the needs of their constituents or their county board members, it's going to be talked about. And they don't want that happening. So You may not feel like you have a lot of influence in Madison, but I can tell you it is incredibly impactful when local folks call. You know, they see us every day. They get very sick of us, hearing from us. But when you guys call, it makes a huge difference. So what we've tried to do at the association is make it easier for the members of the county family to stay informed. What we did this year, again for the second time, was we did a weekly webinar every Monday morning free of charge during the Finance Committee action, where we would talk about, here's what the Finance Committee did last week, here's what's up this week, here are our positions on it. We tried doing that, trying to make it easier. We had about 40 or 45 people on each of those webinars. All those are posted online too if you have any questions, both the webinar and the PowerPoints. Then a few weeks ago we did a final budget wrap up. It was about an hour and a half where we went through more detailed information in this PowerPoint. That's on our website as well. And then we have a comprehensive budget summary that's about 30 pages long that talks about every item in the budget impacting counties. If your department heads haven't looked at that yet, I would recommend that they do it. So just make sure everybody's aware of some of the changes to state and county policy included in the state budget.
Kyle, just a question. 4 or 5 years ago, we adopted a cell phone ban ordinance for Waupaca County. And it was unanimously approved, if I recall correctly. We went to the state to ask to put up signs on the county line, and the state said, no, you can't. You can't do that. And now, just recently, we were asked to get rid of our ordinance because it's overseeing the state. I know the city of Marshfield had a cell phone ordinance. I think Wausau did, but now I believe they are in the same boat as we are. Do you hear, or is there any way the WCA can help us? I mean, it's only sensible. We had a number of cell phone deaths here of young people that the sheriff's department said they were on a cell phone and missed the curve and got killed. Do you see any movement, or is there any way we can get some movement on this? It's only sensible.
Yeah, and that's something, you know, we're happy to speak with DOT and try to figure out what's going on. I know we've had other issues like this where the counties have passed ordinances on whatever item, and so have municipalities. The difference, according to our legal folks, is that counties don't have home rule authority. Essentially, counties are creatures of the state, and the way to boil it down is that counties can't do anything that they're not explicitly allowed or authorized to do in state law. Municipalities, cities, and villages, on the other hand, can do anything they're not expressly prohibited from doing. So it's a little bit different there as far as the authority that we both have. But you see the amount of money that the state DOT is spending on, you know, put your cell phone away type campaigns, whether they're radio ads or TV ads, is a big issue. So that's something we can definitely work on with you guys.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
I got a question at the UW system. They were quite upset when it was proposed a $300 million cut. They got it cut down to $250. It's only 2 or 3 years ago that those regions were called on the carpet for trying to raise tuition when they had something like $700 million in a savings account. What happened to all that they're all of a sudden broke?
Yeah, and that's kind of the perspective of a lot of legislators and majority partiers. They're saying, you had this surplus. Now, whether or not you agree it was a hidden surplus is kind of an individual choice, but that's their view, is that you can take this cut, you don't need to raise tuition. There is a tuition freeze in this budget again, because you have this money. You should spend down that reserve before you do anything else. I think what some of the universities are concerned with is that not all of them had reserves of the magnitude of other campuses, and they're saying, we're taking cuts, and unlike some of the other campuses, we can't make it up. But that's definitely the justification that a lot of legislators are using as to why they're freezing tuition and cutting, like I said, $250 million from the university system.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you so very much, Kyle, for joining us this morning and driving up from Madison.
Absolutely.
You can reach Kyle on the WCA page and the staff page. You can email him, and he'll emails you back. And it was just great to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks for the time.
And Eric, before you get up, we're just going to take a short break here so we can give you all the undivided attention. Clerk Robbins, would you clean up my coffee I spilled there, please? That hasn't been the first time, Mary. Okay, everybody ready? We'll start the second half here. Again, we got another special guest this morning, and this is all a good educational process that we had with Kyle here. And now we have Mr. Fowle here, the Executive Director of East Central Regional Planning. Eric has been with East Central Wisconsin Regional Planning since 1997, but he assumed the Executive Director position in 2005. And that's when I really got to know Eric as your chair here. I represent this county on the East Central Regional Planning Board. And along with me, it's Vice Chairman Gary Barrington and Dwayne Fredowitz, who's the governor's choice to be on the represent Waupaca County on East Central Wisconsin Regional Planning. I have to tell you that it's a consortium of 8 counties, which is Shawano, Calumet, it's Menominee County, Winnebago, Fond du Lac, Outagamie, Waushara, and of course us. And I have to also tell you that, and I said this last year too, but when I came aboard, East Central Regional Planning was in 2004, and that regional planning was in dire straits. Financially, it just it really needed to be revamped. And I have to hand it to this man right here, Mr. Fowle, for digging in and turning this program around, turning this valuable commission around. And I've been honored to be on his board since that time. And we ask him to come here once a year to tell us a little about where we were, where we are today, and where East Central Regional Planning is going, and what it's all about. So I just want to welcome my good friend, Eric Fowle. Thanks for coming, Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for always inviting me when there's other good speakers on the program, too. I always like listening to the folks from WCA. Well, good morning, everyone. In my mind, it's a beautiful morning. It's not 90 degrees and sunny, so I'll take the overcast and the fog. Little more unprepared than usual here today, too. Yesterday, I unfortunately had to tend to my wife in the afternoon, evening, and night as she was gardening and decided to stick a flower stalk into her eye. So she's at doctor's right now having her cornea looked at, but I think everything's going to be fine. Nonetheless, wanted to give a little update on things East Central's been doing. As many of you know, Commission was formed back in 1972. We do put out an annual report talking a lot about what we do, and I trust everyone had gotten one in the mail much earlier this year. On your desks, there's just a short summary, a little 2-page, doesn't contain everything that we did, but highlights some of the key things. I'm not going to go through that in detail. What I'm actually going to do is use some new material on you guys. I was hoping to have a new marketing piece ready from the printer today, and that didn't happen, so I tried to convert some of it to a presentation, and you'll get that in the mail shortly. But as Mr. Keppen had announced, we have 8 counties. Last time I came here, we had 7 counties and a few municipalities in Fond du Lac, and I'm very pleased to say with the leadership in Fond du Lac County, they joined the commission in 2015 here, first time in 32 years. And I think that speaks volumes to them as a county, knowing that they have to get back into the game to be part of a region and to look at regional issues and look at regional opportunities. So collaboration obviously is a key with our work. And we obviously believe strongly in working together. And we need to continue to do that, I think, to make our region stronger, to make your community stronger, and the individual counties stronger as well. I think plain and simple, when we boil it down, we see our job as basically building a brighter future at all levels, in every level that we can. And in a nutshell, it is what we do. A lot of our work boils down to making improvements in community, whether it's infrastructure, economy, just government itself in many cases. We like to do so efficiently as well. And I'm sure you can't read this, but over a 5-year period from 2009 to 2013, we levied about $3.7 million from our counties over that 5-year period. But in exchange, when we add the numbers up, we're able to leverage an additional $14.3 million using those local monies to do planning work that's needed to improve or elevate our region. And I'll get back to that a little bit. We've got a lot of programs. I'm going to hit on a few things and just touch on some things here. But one of them is helping to create a competitive economic environment. We do a variety of things in terms of program areas. There's little things that we do, such as helping the city of Waupaca with a housing study and a housing report last year, which gives them new information, new perspective on what they need to do to address housing issues or use that in concert with other economic development strategies. We do a lot of big things as well. I mentioned, I believe last year, we were the receipt of $2 million in funding from Department of Defense stemming from the Oshkosh Corporation layoffs. We've worked with many county partners here as well to really look at a number of areas to improve our region, make it more diverse in terms of its economy as well as more resilient. So we've been doing things that are starting to come to a close at the end of this year, and you'll definitely hear more. But we're looking at the supply chain for Oshkosh Corporation and Marinette Marine, the whole defense supply chain, and we're going to have some information soon to share from that as far as what businesses are out there, how many businesses are really out there that are tied and connected to that, and then looking at moving those into some new market opportunities so they're not as reliant on defense. We're looking at aviation and aerospace as a major area for advancement into diversifying our economy. And while a lot of the focus is going to happen on the I-41 corridor, it doesn't mean Waupaca County is left out. We know you have an airport here. We've got some smaller airports in the region that we think ultimately will play a role or have some opportunity. Perhaps not as big as those other ones, but nonetheless, there's opportunity. We've also used some of the money to work with our friends at WMEP who work directly with the suppliers in terms of getting them turned around. Some of those suppliers lost 80 to 90% or even 100% of their business when the layoffs occurred at Oshkosh Corp. I do know for a fact there is at least one company within Waupaca County that's working with WMEP to try and get back on their feet or get turned around, have the skills, the certifications necessary to move into other marketplaces. So we're really excited about that, and hopefully we can report some better, more detailed results here shortly. Obviously, we're very future-looking, very forward-looking. We foster a lot at the local and the county levels in terms of cooperation, policy coordination. I think one of the best examples here is our Safe Routes to School program. We started that program back in 2009, working with about 21 school districts and 79 schools. We are up to 137 schools that we're working with through that program. And it has a lot of impacts, certainly from a safety standpoint. We can't count how many kids didn't get hit by a car. That doesn't exist, but we know there's less chance of that happening. And we've served more than 42,000 children within the region over that time period. And we've also helped those communities leverage about $750,000 in other grants to improve infrastructure in and near their schools, just by virtue of going through that planning process of Safe Routes to School. We provide a lot of outreach, a lot of advocacy, a lot of education. That takes a variety of forms. It might just be informational meetings. It might be a focus meeting with the community on a particular issue, or it may be some of our mini conference events. But we do a lot of things in that arena. We're also proud that we provide or try to provide services that meet our counties and communities' needs. We do have a technical assistance program, and annually we ask for projects to be submitted. Those forms and the notices went out a few weeks ago. They'll be due back in October. But we do many things using the levy monies that were given to us by the counties. It might be various programmatic work, such as administering your NR 135 program. We're working with City of Waupaca on an updated zoning code right now. We're helping them with some bike and pedestrian planning. We've even worked with Town of Madison doing a well water testing program and helping to coordinate that, and I think they found that of value. I thought I'd change it up a little bit here and just showcase one project, give you a little more detail and something close to home. And you may not hear much about this, but your biggest city in the county certainly is aware of it. And we worked with them starting last year and through the course of the beginning of this year to create or craft a vision plan for their downtown. In 2018 or 2019, Main Street's going to be torn up. And that's obviously a driver for change and an opportunity to relook at downtown and what that street could ultimately look like and help in terms of economic development. We went through a very elaborative process using placemaking as a basis, looking at an urban core like that. Ultimately, you want it to be vibrant, you want it to be successful, you want to have people milling around, events, other things. There's a lot of different things that come into play, but I think everyone agreed we need to make downtown Waupaca a great place. Not that it isn't right now, but we can improve upon it. So we went through a very elaborate process with a committee. We designed a number of exercises that were very visual, got the committees to think about very simple questions about how downtown functions, feels, looks, what improvements are necessary. So both mapping exercises and a lot of other materials that generated ideas. After a lot of working with this committee, we took things out and went extensively out to the public, and even using a mobile workshop that Brennan Kane, their planner, convinced the store owner to let us use for a week time period to get people to come in and react to some of the plans and some of the ideas or give us new ones. All in all, we crafted a concept plan for downtown that breaks the community or at least the downtown, into various districts or zones. This is a very conceptual plan, obviously, but it does recognize a number of things and the opportunities that are present in the city, particularly for redevelopment. I mean, it's a very intact downtown, which is a great place to start, but there are places that need help, and we think there's a few hidden gems in there as well, particularly the area behind the Riverview Park and the backside of the buildings there, I think could make a fantastic place to be and a gathering spot. We focused also a lot on Main Street and parking. A lot of the committee folks were business owners, and they certainly had their opinions with regards to parking or whether the diagonal should stay or change. So we looked at a lot of different alternatives and trying to see what might make sense in terms of pedestrian orientation and how pedestrians can benefit from it, not just cars. Unfortunately, we couldn't come to an exact conclusion or decision at that meeting, and a lot of it revolves around the perceptions of parking and maybe misinformation. And so out of this study, a parking study was one of the recommendations. So working with the city, we know that we put in about $30,000 worth of staff time helping them through this process. So that's county monies basically going back into community here. But we also know that they just leveraged $42,000 worth of grants from WEDC and CDBG program to help move forward on those things. They're hiring, or they have hired a consultant for a parking study to look in depth at that, and they're issuing a master plan RFP in September, and the city has budgeted additional funds to get that work done. So you're going to see a lot of activity there, but I think it's just one example of where our help not only fosters the vision for the community, but then that vision, that document helps leverage other resources into the process. Even have a quote here from Brennan Kane. Without the technical assistance program offered by East Central, the city would not be in its current position seeking funding for future development and redevelopment of the heart of our community. So let me talk and end things a little more talking about dollars. I decided to do a little analysis and try and better show the value of the commission over a 5-year period to our constituents here. And what we have is a graph, and the purple and the blue basically represent the annual amount of money given to us by the counties, roughly $700,000, somewhere in that area. We use part of that to go directly back to the counties and communities through technical assistance programs, these projects like I just mentioned with Waupaca, and that adds some immediate value. What's left in blue, we basically hold and reserve that for matching other state and federal program funds to do our transportation planning, economic development, working with DNR on sewer service planning. So taking that blue leverages that much in terms of planning grants for our programs, for planning work that otherwise wouldn't be done. With a little bit of work, and this isn't 100% complete, we've estimated that the results of our work can be directly translated into value by how those documents and those plans are used. For example, I just said we spent about $30,000 in time working for City of Waupaca. They've already used that to leverage $42,000 in grants. my recreation planner, Trish Now, who some of you know, she's been keeping track of the comprehensive outdoor rec plans that she's done in communities over the last 5 years. Those plans have been used to leverage more than $3 million in grants for improvements in those parks. We could add much more to this thing, but it starts to kind of get stretched off the page. On one hand, I should count the $25 million a year that our MPO transportation planning process brings in the Fox Cities, Oshkosh, and Fond du Lac. If that planning process wasn't there, the federal monies wouldn't be coming in to cost share those projects. So we wanted to impress upon you the great value we think RPCs are, which is my lead into one little thing I haven't had to say for many years. Sorry, but we're going to raise your levy a little bit for next year. This is what the levy is going to look like next year. Unfortunately, we're going to raise it about 3.3%. From a dollar standpoint, it's not that much, it's just under $25,000 total. Spread across the counties, the impacts vary. With Waupaca County, it's about $2,000 increase. The reasons for that are basically some drivers on the salary end, the benefits end, one of the biggest costs for us, obviously. And a big concern is our ability to pay competitive wages for competitive staff. And I've always prided our agency on the staff and the capabilities that we've had. So we're talking with steering committee about where we sit in the market, what we might be able to do, and some of that's gonna take some additional money. To put that into context, though, this is the last 10 years worth of levy. I inherited the 2005 year, so the rest is, all of it's mine. But if you look at this, we've been able to do much more with less. A few of the early years we had to raise the levy, get out of some financial problems. We focused more on finding contract work, other revenue sources, and leveraging those planning dollars. All in all, when you look at those last 9 or 10 years, the net change is an increase of about $8,500 across 7 to 8 counties over 9 years, which I think is tough to do in any other world, but we've managed to do it. The large increase you see for 2015 wasn't really raising the levy. That was Fond du Lac County coming in as a member and joining, and they paid additional money to make up for the parts of the county that weren't originally a member. So little asterisk there just for you to note. So that's kind of the bad news, but I hope I put it in a good news context, and I hope that didn't become an issue in your county. We certainly will do what we can to try and keep the levy stable, if not low, compared to the value we think you get out of it. And we certainly thank you for your support, and we look forward to continuing our work with the county board, committees, communities, and their staff. It's a great partnership, I think. So thank you, and I'll answer any questions.
Questions for Eric? I guess you're very complete, and thank you very much for coming, Eric.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, and you guys have a rest of the meeting. It's a good one.
See you down the road.
Take care.
Yep. Mr. Holman, I think you're. Heidi.
Oh, Heidi, I'm sorry. I saw Mary over there, I thought was next. Sorry, Heidi. I need another warm-up act.
Just can't wait to get to that microphone. Good morning, Heidi. Next, we're going to have the 2014 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Our auditor was in and gave a report to the Finance Committee, and everything looked pretty well. And we thought it would be better if our own finance director could explain the details rather than our auditor giving a mass amount of information. Heidi speaks our language and we speak her language, so good morning.
Good morning. I won't, like Chairman Keppen said, the auditors were at the Finance Committee and reviewed the annual financial report in pretty detailed format, so I won't spend a lot of time going over it. I have two books on your desk. One would be the large book, approximately 100 and some pages. But then there's the management communication. And I'm going to go through that piece. The larger book is for, gives you really good information, and it might even help you sleep at night if you want to try. No, I'm just kidding. So, but we may refer back to that with questions if there are any. If you start in the management letter, page 1, just pages 1 through 4 is the audit letter indicating what the scope of their audit is, and their audit determines whether the financial statements are presented fairly, and they look at the internal controls to verify that there are good internal controls over financial reporting. So the pages 1 through 4 indicate the aspects of their audit and what they all do throughout that process. Page 5 is a summary of the financial information for the governmental funds. And we start out with the general fund, which is the main operating fund of the county. And if you go about halfway down, it shows you the total general fund balance at the close of 2014. You'll see a fairly significant increase, and we have a $835,000 increase to our unassigned fund balance for the end of 2014. Now, our policy indicates 25% of our operating revenues should be is what we should hold as a minimum within the unassigned fund balance, and that would be at $5.9 million. So we closed the year at about a $1.6 million over policy in the unassigned fund balance. And then, but if you kind of peek up a little bit to the very top portion of it, you can see that about 200,000, well, not even 200,000, there's a small decrease in the fund balance that we have as a non-spendable for delinquent taxes. That played a small role in that unassigned fund balance, but most of it was in the area of collection of sales tax revenue for what we had anticipated that we would collect, in addition to some reductions in what we had anticipated for expenses, and that is in more detail in the next page. The special revenue funds are Health and Human Services, the Transportation Services Fund, Economic Development, and the Environmental TIF Fund. You can see that those fund balances, especially in the Health and Human Services, Transportation, Economic Development, are holding pretty solid fund balances from the previous year in comparison to 2014. In debt service, you'll see the restricted fund balance is a little bit high in comparison to the previous year. I don't know if you remember when we did the borrowing in 2014, we had some capitalized interest that we had set aside for the debt payments that we were going to be making here in 2015. So then you'll see that drop back down. And then obviously the capital improvement fund had a very large increase to the restricted fund balance. That was for the bond issuance that we will be spending down over the next 3 years. So overall, general fund is the one you really want to keep your eye on, and that is holding strong right now. So that's a good thing. Page 6 just kind of gives you some information as to what those results were. And again, here you can see the sales tax collection was about $275,000 higher than what we had originally budgeted for, and the general government expenditures in the general fund came in $617,000 under what we had anticipated, which makes up a large portion of why that unassigned did increase. The Transportation Services Fund increased mostly due to the capital outlay expenditures are being spent using the bond proceeds and not utilizing that fund balance. And again, describes why the capital projects fund increased significantly due to the bonding. The next few pages of this report kind of gives you an operation on the enterprise funds, which would be your highway operations and the nursing home operations. Page 7 shows you what the operating income was for the highway department. It shows you where their sources were between state, local, and county, and then their administrative and other charges. And then you see their operating expenses were at about 11 million, their depreciation at 647. Total operating income was 125,000 in comparison to 807 the previous year. Page H breaks that down even a little bit further. You can see where their cost for machinery operations decreased. Their operating income went from 168,000 down to 168,000 from 600 the previous year. So that's where your major reduction to operating income. There still was operating income, it just was reduced significantly, mostly in the areas of your machinery operations. Page 9 shows you the net effect of the special revenue fund. Transportation Services Fund is the operating fund, the county operations of the highway. And it shows you that where the expenditures are going for maintenance and construction for the past 4 years, and where that fund balance has gone for over the past 4 years. And then on page 10 is the operating results of Lakeview Manor. In comparison to the previous year, the operating loss was $978,873, which is about $50,000 higher than it was the previous year. However, then you have your non-operating revenue, which is the supplemental payment program, and your property tax appropriations. And the transfer in, we have a fund balance assigned in the general fund that transfers over to Lakeview Manor. So when we rent the land out there, and the rental that we receive, we set that aside as fund balance in the general fund. For the road improvement out at that back, to fund that back road improvement, and this is just transferring from the general fund, from that assigned fund balance for those improvements as they move forward on that process. So total net income in 2014 was $272,000. Previous year was $328,000. Page 11 just gives you a summary. The data is not all pulled together. That's why you're seeing 2009 to 2013. But as you see from previous years down, you can see where Act 10 came into play on the fringe benefit ratio. You can see that in 2010, 71% of the fringe was a fringe benefit rate, and it's down to 36%. So that's where you're seeing a fluctuation coming down on their actual net income. And this describes some of the summary portions of the nursing home operations. And then they start, the remaining area of the management letter indicates new reporting requirements that are going to be coming down through GASB, which is going to put some pressure on the finance area as far as how we report federal grants, federal and state grants, mostly federal grants. GASB is part of a federal program. More detailed information that we're required to track, along with better documentation on internal controls and enforcement of internal controls on how we handle the financial operation of the federal awards. And obviously, it would be on all awards because you wouldn't have separate policies, internal control policies between, for federal dollars versus other dollars. So there's some work that we're trying to get done in our department to try to meet the requirements based on these new guidance through the federal government. And then I'm going to make it short. I know I shouldn't because this is really important information. The large book towards the back are some really good tables of a 10-year history, and I would recommend you taking a peek at that. It kind of shows you where our expenditures have gone over the past 10 years. And where our revenues sources are coming from, and it really, if you look at a 10-year trend, you can see what we're going to be facing in the future.
Okay, any questions for Heidi?
Heidi, on Lakeview Manor, page 10, where our net, oh, first of all, what is supplemental payment program?
That's that's the Medicaid, the supplemental payment is an annual reimbursement that they get, and Megan probably could describe it a little bit better. Sorry, is that me?
Oh, that's my new,
Oh, okay.
Mary just gave me something new that didn't work.
It's a supplemental program that comes through from, based upon your Medicaid cost report, that is given to county nursing homes that are ran, and that it goes off from that Medicaid, what you're reimbursed by Medicaid versus what your actual costs were.
And then the net income for 2014 and 2013, does that money go back into the general fund?
Not at this point, it does not. It stays within the nursing home operations. There's been no determination as to whether or not to bring that back. You know, there has not been that discussion, no. The enterprise funds net income on both sides remain within the fund itself, both in the highway operations and the nursing home operations.
I apologize, Joyce, for the stuff that happened up here. We got electronic problems.
I think your mic was too close to what did you say?
Sabotage, Heidi.
Any other questions for Heidi? If not, you know her phone number, where she stays downstairs, and she'll answer all the questions you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we'll have Mr. Holman.
Test.
Roger, I'm just going to be testing my old apparatus here. Can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Thanks. Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you too. Do you know what the fish said when he ran into the wall?
Damn.
Thank you.
And now we have Mr. Holman.
Gotta like those sick jokes. I've got an opportunity today to actually come here and tell you about a job that was well done. We contracted with our highway department to carry out the work to remove Little Hope Dam, and in the end I was very impressed with the operation and how it was carried out. But to get there, I want to give you a little history so you know what's going on, where we are. But bottom line is, Little Hope Dam is no longer in place. We now have a free-flowing river. Oops, thought you said right side, Mary. Okay, just a quick update. I'm sure most of you do not remember this dam in 1920. Maybe Jack, you've got some memory of it. This is a picture I found recently, and it does show the Little Hope Dam, and it did not change much over the years. Now, there was a previous dams here, 1850, in that period we had dams, but it's kind of interesting when we look at it. The barn in the back, some of that stuff still might be there, but this is from 1920. This was the dam that eventually, in 1956, is still there. And this was the dam that had a little problem. The individual standing on that dam is Bruce Golding, who used to work for the highway department, and he gave me these photos, and so I thought I'd share that with you. 1956, they had a major flood out there, and so we do get floods in that area, and of course the whole dam was taken out for the most part. This is the culvert on K. You see it's almost at capacity, if not totally filled, and I don't know if that's the same culvert or not, Dean. I don't know if there's any record of that being replaced since '56, so my guess is it's the same culvert. This is the dam that was being put in by the highway department. We have no records except this picture that I found. Basically what they did is they built it in place, and the water was run across the road in the old slough, the old culvert area that ran to the mill, and they were able to accomplish this. What we think they did is they went in and poured a form over the top of the 1920 dam. So you got a 1920 dam, an 1850 dam, all in the same place. 87, about the time when I first started, 85, we were doing inspections. The reason I'm showing you these, 91, highways out there doing some repair work. Notice the dam doesn't change much. 94, same structure, looks pretty much the same, a little more vegetation in some areas. '96, still got the same type of stuff going on. '06, inspection again, dam still looks pretty much the same. 2009, we started noticing concrete problems. And our inspection out there, we were looking at it and we began to realize that our concrete was starting to break down. So the alarm went off in 2009, we need to do something. And we hired Ayers and Associates. Ayers and Associates came in, this is just a summary of their letter at the end, but basically what they said is you have two options. You can either replace the dam or you can remove the dam. And so we moved forward from there. We had found a leak in the dam structure around July of 2012. We had contacted the DNR and said, would you please come out here and help us? Tell us what our options are. About a year plus later, they finally showed up. And the result of that inspection was the order to draw down the dam. And along with that, the park committee had to make a decision what they were going to do on that site by December 31st, 2013. So the process was moving forward at that point. Well, the other thing that happened here, which was interesting, is the dam was reclassified from a small dam to a large dam. Historically, it was considered a small dam, different standards. Large dam requires more work. So we started the drawdown. We decided to do it internally, Parks Department. Two of us worked on it to keep the public from shooting us. We would not put anybody else out there. John Francis, our park supervisor, devised a way to pull the stop logs out. It gets harder as we go down, but he continued working. We took out one set of logs every other day, every 2 days, every 3 days, depending on weekend, to slowly take it down. And you can see here he's come up with a new way to pull the other one up. They get tougher and tougher as we went along. He's out here working. And again, the individual standing on there, that's Bruce Golding. He pops up in this dam a lot because he was our dam keeper. And this is unfortunately not too long before he passed away, but Bruce was out there telling us how to do this, which was very interesting. And then John continues, but the reason I put this in is you can see the drawdown of what's occurring in the back, the flat areas in the back where the mud is showing up. This is where the envelope was there. We had about less than a foot of water in most areas out in that pond. So you can see it didn't take much to get it down there. This is after we pulled out the final boards. And actually we didn't pull them out, they broke out at the bottom. And we were able to get them out of there. What we discovered is, yeah, we had a dam that had some problems. And these problems continued as we looked further. We began to realize, and you can see some of the crack and spalling and stuff going on. But structurally, the dam had reached this point. It was 60 plus years old, and dams usually last about 50 years. Our goal actually was to repair this dam, and that was our original purpose. We had to get those I-beams out of there because we had a canoe go kidding wampus and almost kill the people. And so we got permission to take it out, pulled those out, cleared it all out, and you can see what the pond looked like or the river looked like at that point. And that's about where we were at when we decided to move forward with the rest of this. Put together a report for the park committee to give them a review of their options. On the 19th of August 19th, 2013, 5-0, removed the dam. They also told me I had to work with the property owners, but that's a whole other story. So we're working on all that. Of course, along that way, we ended up with a contested case hearing, got lawsuits, everything's going. Fortunately for us, we were found in favor of the county. Judge ordered that a permit be issued. Permit was issued in April of this year. Highway was said, get busy, get this dam out of there. Well, it took them until July until the conditions were right, and they finally got in there. So, Little Hope Dam removal, completed by the county, funded by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. So far, everything's going good. Started the project, went out there, and you went out there with this hammer, and you go to town, and you take the bottom out, figuring that's going to take us a half a day. We had that broken up in 20 minutes. It cracked like an eggshell. So we knew we had another area in there that proved that they probably need to get out of there. But the work I'm going to be showing you is we work from the far side this way. The operator in there is Kevin Haas, excellent operator. Very fortunate for the county to have an individual like that because he really knows how to work that piece of equipment. As you can see here, we loaded this stuff out. In the background is the culvert that we brought in because we wanted to do everything in place and not contaminate the water. And so this is how we proposed, and it worked out really well. Of course, you got to stop part way. We got things done. We said we better make sure we're doing things right. So we had a little planning meeting, and up there actually is the Land and Water Conservation staff. They came out and assisted this whole project. They actually did the plans for the removal, designed the plans, and then they went out and they set the different levels that we need to do and everything out there, and went really well working together. And the highway had one individual, Dave, who really took on this task and worked with us, and it really worked out really well. Put the culvert in. This idea weren't sure we were going to work. We actually experimented with this and found out that the culvert floats. And when we put it in, it started going downstream. But they were able to pack rock in around and put a smaller one in, creating our own bridge. That way we could get across the other side, started the process. You can see we're clearing, grubbing, putting stuff in. Here's where we got really lucky. We needed to dispose of a lot of material. The Conservation Club, just down the road, less than a mile, opened up the door and said, come on in here. Ron Wilkie's working the piece of equipment there, went down there. We buried most of the stuff, pulled out the good stuff. It was super. It saved a lot of money, and they were happy, and we were happy. So you can see them in the process here, basically because of all the stone. And if you're shooting guns and that, you don't want stone on the other side because the bullet might come back. So he cleaned it up and went really well. Yeah, you can see Kevin here working away. He's working on that side. The idea was to cut that all down and then come back in and place rock. And we had to place certain size rock, and then we put smaller rock on top to as the level that we had set. Basically, it's a 100-year flood level. Continue placing the rock. You can see him going through there. Okay, he's done on the other side. Now it's time to see if we can get the wall out. He pulled it out, brought it back to this side, and that was important to us. We were afraid we were going to have to bust it up in the water. Turns out we didn't have to. We was able to pull that thing right out. So then we had to get the culverts out of there. Two guys standing on there, probably Keith and Dave were working away trying to hook that thing up. And you can see everybody out here just moving around. We got them all piled up here. See the other side, what it looks like? It's turning good. But this is how we busted up that rock. We came back and went after it. That hammer drill went right straight through. It just popped right through there. So I got that all busted up. And now we're starting on the County K side. And here we discovered something. We figured this stuff is from 1920. These were the tiebacks that were in there to hold the wall up. And they found the wood structure and all the stuff that was in there. And you can see right here that it's in concrete. And that piece of concrete was buried underneath all this, and they poured right over the top of it. And that wood was out there, and that wood smelled as fresh because it's been underwater for all these years. They also found something more unique. And over in the corner over there is an example. You can take a look at it later. These are posts that were driven into the ground to form a crib, a rock crib. And we think that that's what they used in the 1850s. They put a series of these around and put boards around and fill it with rock. So we pulled out a number of these. We kept a couple of them. And that's actually the same one right there. So history was kind of fun out there. We did not find any bodies. Jimmy Hoffa is not buried there. This is getting near the end of the project. You can see how the one side looks, and now we're on the County K side, working their way. But every time we moved, they had to check to make sure they had their elevations right. So we had guys down in there doing that over and over, making sure we had the right elevation, trying to match it up. And we did have a lot of visitors. We had a little help from the Sheriff's Department to make sure things were in line. And I do thank the Sheriff's Department for providing that. We had only one irate customer. Generally, we'd let them come up to this tree, and then we said no further. And overall, I think most people were very appreciative of what was going on and understood they had to stay out of the way. This is the finished product. It really did turn out nice. The river is settling in. 3 to 5 years, you won't know if there was anything out there. But I do want to give a special thanks to these guys. Keith ran that crew, and Dave, he just made things work. He was so good, he went out in the water and got my sign out of the water for me because he just walked right out there. He didn't care. It was just fun to watch. And of course, I mentioned Kevin, and Ron was not pictured, but Ron was pictured earlier. Those guys really did so much with this. I do also want to thank the park committee. It's a long process. We've been at this for 3+ years. You know, you begin to realize what a long road that actually is. Going through the rest, the conservation department, land water, those guys were super. I mean, I'd go to them with my questions and they gave me answers. You know, the park staff, they put up with a lot of stuff during this time frame. They got yelled at a lot of times, got in trouble a lot of times because they were trying to do the right thing. And in the end, they recovered. Finance committee, you sat behind us and said, okay, we'll help you out. And it was appreciated. It got us to where we needed to be. We knew we had some support to do what the park committee had said they wanted to do. You know, the highway department, Dean, I'm very happy with what you got here. From now on, I do want Keith's crew. Any job I have done has to have Keith's crew. And, you know, the county board, all of you have been very good about this. You've come in and talked to me, asked me questions, want to know what was going on, and we kind of try to keep up to speed. And I also want to thank the citizens in the town of Dayton. The majority of them were good people. and they worked with us, and they didn't give us a hard time. Yeah, they asked hard questions. Yeah, this was tough. People lost something that they really valued. And when you see that happen, you know it's going to be a tough haul. In the end, we're done with it. It's gone. The river will now go where it wants to go, and it'll be wonderful next 20, 30, 40, 50 years to get there. Any questions?
Did the 20,000 appropriated dollars cover the cost?
The cost for the removal of the dam was paid for by the Department of Natural Resources. We got a grant for 50,000. Early estimates are we're going to be under 40,000. So all costs involved with the dam removal were recovered by a grant.
Roger, you mentioned, I think, at one time that some of the guardrail was going to be removed.
Oh, can I go backwards on here, Mary? No, that's not where I wanted to go. That's another presentation.
There, you can see previous when you did that. Roger, if you go to the keyboard on the laptop, just hit your back arrow screen.
Oh, this one? Oops. Try it again.
And there's, see, on the bottom there, you can get, there's little arrows.
Yeah. Okay. You asked that question. The guardrail was removed. There used to be a big tree right there where that pylon is. That was a basswood, and I probably should have shown you a picture of that. Basswood was about this big, and what you see inside of my arms is what was inside that basswood. It was hollow, completely hollow, and they took that down, and from about that point on, all the way around up to here, they were able to remove the guardrail. And by taking the guardrail out, it really does provide for a safer site. There's more escape place for pedestrians and people to get out of there. Lower cost for the highway to maintain, and in the end, it's just going to clean up really well. Yeah, there's work to be done to clean the site up out there. There's still some mowing to be done. That stump still has to be taken out. There's some road work I think they've got to look at. But overall, it's really nice. The neighbors were happy. Dean went and talked to the neighbors on each side. We got their permission to remove some other trees. We did take some trees out near the Red Mill that were bad. They were going to come down, and they were in the right of way, and it was a good thing we got them out of there that whole time. So yeah, the guardrail was removed in that area.
Thanks a lot, Roger.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're due up at branch 1 at 11 o'clock. Then we'll come back and finish our meeting according to the standards our counselor said that's okay. Okay?
I think everyone's here, yeah, that's going to show up. Welcome, everybody. I'm Terry Tews, the Clerk of Courts. There's the Honorable Philip Kirk. Judge Kirk is here.
All rise.
Janelle Wieters is a deputy in my office, and she also has learned this program with me so that there's more than one of us that can be an expert on this. So I'll go ahead and let the judge welcome you all.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Glad to see that you're able to come up and see this fancy stuff and what you all purchased. And, anyway, I think it's all kind of working now, which is really a very good thing. There's been a little bit of a problem in the past with getting it to work everywhere all at the same time, but it's provided us with a very, very nice way to handle a lot of the people that we see on a regular basis on the criminal side of our calendars. And so we do a lot of, as much as we can, the people that are arrested, we can just simply allow them to stay at the jail, and then we can conduct the proceedings right over the monitor here, and the attorney will go over to the jail so that they can be with their clients. And so if they need to whisper to one another, they can do that. And they have, maybe they'll show you, I think somebody's going to be in the jail here in a little bit, but they have a button that they can push that can shut out the sound so that they can talk among themselves privately and not broadcast it to everybody around here. So it's really quite a very nice system, and We haven't, at least I haven't, had the opportunity to use all of these other fancy devices that you can use with it, which I couldn't even begin to explain how they work, which Terry can, but they are designed to try to accommodate the technology that everybody uses, the lawyers use in their everyday business. So whenever they come to court, they can bring their depositions with them. We can play them on ear, or they need to have some piece of paper or some transcripts put on the machine, and everybody can read it. And the reason we got such a huge screen over there is that it's for the jurors, so they can see it easily, and anybody else in the courtroom for that matter. And based upon where somebody is positioned, we put that little smaller screen over there to give full access to the people who are in here, so that even though it's kind of a virtual, if you will, operation of the court system, because not everybody is physically present in the courtroom, we can give that appearance that everybody is fully participating, and so we're still baby steps in making it operational, but it really is, I think, will, in the long range, turn out to be a very beneficial system for our purposes here. And while I tell everybody, it seems to me like we have a little too many screens in here, these two up here have nothing to do with the screens that you see on here, because these are state of Wisconsin computers that have all of our court cases on them and that type of a thing. So that is totally separate. And sadly, we're transitioning to all paperless files, or whatever they're called, which unfortunately I will be out of here before that becomes fully operational, because I think that's the stupidest thing in the world. But anyway, it makes a little difference what I think, but that's the way the system is going to be. So I think that's about what I have to say.
I think what I'll do first of all is just explain to you some of the equipment that you see set up in the courtroom. We now have an 80-inch TV display over there. We have a 32-inch or 42-inch display there, and then the judge has his own monitor. This thing that you see right here above our jury deliberation room, that is now our hearing listening device. In the past, we just had a radio transmitter that we would give people, and we wished them the best of luck. Now we went to an infrared listening device, and I did set one over there, and it just projects for our room only. So it works very nice. You do have to be in the courtroom, and if somebody wants to hear how well these work. But these are very nice. We've had these used several times since we put them in, because we get a lot of clients in guardianship cases and protective placements and things like that who are very hard of hearing, and so this has really helped us be better in compliance with the American Disabilities Act and people being able to listen and hear our type of hearings that we have going on. So the hearing devices have been a phenomenal addition for our courtrooms, and each courtroom has them. So that is our infrared listening devices that we've installed. You'll see 2 cameras in the back and 2 cameras in the front. Those are the 4 quad displays that you do see on our screens. So those are the displays that also, what you see on our screen is what they're gonna see on the other end. Eventually, once we connect with our jail, you're just gonna see our jail camera. The one nice thing with installing this new system, and a lot of people say, oh, the jail is right behind you. Isn't it more convenient just to bring the prisoner over? There's several reasons why this is a better option for us. One, it's better for public safety. And 2, in the past, it took 4 officers to bring 1 prisoner over here. It took it took the jail to bring them up to the back holding cells, and then 2 transport officers to come and get them and bring them into the courtroom. So before, where it used to take 4 personnel, it takes 1 person to put them in a room in the jail now. So we're saving a lot of the jail's time and a lot of transport's time. The other convenience for us, again, is just the safety factor for the courts and everyone else involved. So it just doesn't allow the public to mingle with some of the prisoners that we do have coming in. So that was a great, great change for us. Janelle, if you want to go ahead and try to call Cindy and see if she'll pick up for us. So we call directly into our jail. We did do some testing to outside lines. It is working for us to call outside, because our intentions eventually is to call Winnebago Mental Health and other mental health facilities to be able to connect with them too, to have to not transport some of these folks in.
So this system will work like so you have a prisoner in Winnebago County, so.
Depending on the type of hearing and if council agrees, but yes, that is our intention to use it that way. There's Cindy. Hello, Cindy.
Hi.
And there's Deb. Cindy has been so patient with us through this whole program. You know, we can't give Cindy enough credit, because every time we have to test, we call Cindy, she goes over there, she runs the equipment, and she's been very proactive with us and making sure all this works and everything gets done. So for me, I have to give Cindy a big thank you, because she's just done a fantastic job through IS in making sure that this flows much better. So thank you, Cindy, again, for always being present for us. But that is where our prisoner sits, and then where Debbie is sitting is usually where the attorney sits with them. So can you hit your mute button? And now you'll see that it'll show on our screen they muted their microphones. So, because as the judge indicated, we have to be careful just to make sure that if the attorney wants to have a conversation with their client, they can mute us out so that we can't hear what they're talking about. So we ran into a few problems the first time, I think, when Judge Kirk had one of the prisoners before he came into the courtroom. We were all set up, ready to go, and the gal sitting there just kept saying things that she probably shouldn't have been saying on the video conferencing equipment. So finally I said to the clerk, just mute her out for now so we don't have to listen. You know, you try to explain to them, believe it or not, you shouldn't be incriminating yourself. You shouldn't be talking about this. You know, you need to talk to an attorney. So people don't realize that, they're very upset. So it's worked very well. The attorneys are typically there. And I think it's been just a great addition to the jail. I did get a call last week from Munising, Michigan. They have a person in our county jail, and they want to try to connect eventually to our jail to do some dealings with their prisoner from Munising. So we're going to try and work on that too as time goes on. But Cindy, do you have anything you want to tell the?
I want, Debbie was going to explain the time saving.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Alrighty, this works really well so that the officers don't have to shackle up the inmates and take them over to the secured hallway so that the transport officers can take them to court. And after court, they return them. Our officer has to go out of their way to pick those inmates up. It's a big security risk, shackling the inmates and taking them over, due to the fact that we are supposed to have one officer for each shackled inmate. We don't have that much officer help there, so it's easier for us to bring them in here. We don't have to shackle them because they're all within our walking distance.
They never leave their secured jail, so they are in the secured jail. They're not outside of the secured area. The attorney actually has to get access and get into our secured jail. So they don't leave the jail, and that is the best safety factor we can have, is they don't leave. I mean, obviously the judge will release them sometimes on signature bonds and that, they will eventually leave. But like Debbie said, it just cuts down on time for us.
Did that help to eliminate some of the security checks downstairs coming into the courthouse?
No, that doesn't really affect us much there with this type of a system. You know, because those types of cases we still have to hold in the courtroom, so some of those folks will still come through, just not our jail people. The kind of things you're talking about when we sometimes call in security is if we have I see us using it more for family cases, and typically the person isn't in jail. It's just a family dispute that we have to make sure we have security for.
Terry, if you're in their room, what do they see of the courtroom?
They saw that 4-quad display of the cameras like you had seen before we connected with them. So what you saw before we connected with Cindy and Deb, you see what they saw.
But they wouldn't see the jury, perhaps.
No, they do not see the jury, but we wouldn't use it for a jury trial. The only time I think they could possibly use it is for a doctor's testimony, maybe, to save some time for a doctor coming in, but not typically. It's not It's not intended for jury. It's mainly intended to cut down on transports from mental health facilities. A year or so ago, we had a person that really shouldn't have been transported back and forth from a mental health facility. We should have been doing this because it was very traumatic for the person. You know, you see in the news all the time about issues with mental health folks, and you know, we need to do more for them. This is part of doing more for them. This is part of less disruptive to their lives if we can start communicating with Winnebago Mental Health and other facilities. And Diane actually is probably the person that can talk to you more about her role and what will happen when we can start connecting with those facilities. But I really think for the sake of some of these folks, leaving them in their cared facilities is better than transporting them back and forth for hearings. And even in some circumstances, like Munising, Michigan is contacting us because it would cost them hundreds, you know, probably $2,000 or $3,000 to come get the guy and haul him up to Michigan just to bring him back to go back again. And so the technology has just created better efficiencies. But when you go to a trial or a certain stage in proceedings, and the judge can probably tell you, and Diane will tell you more too, but at certain stages we can't use this equipment because the people do have to be present. But the savings that it gives us up front is just astronomical for time and people, especially for the jail, like Debbie said. So,
Are they on? Can they hear us over there now?
yeah, they can hear us.
Can you hear us? Cindy?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. You couldn't hear us until you pushed the button, is that right?
No, we could hear you, we just weren't paying attention right at that moment.
Suffer from the same problem I do. But one of the, I think one of the things that I think is really most important is that while it's the visual impact of the system, but really what's as important, if not more important, is the sound quality of the system. You know, what we had in here before was really kind of a Three Stooges operation. It was awful. We have the microphones on the council table kind of you know, set so they can't move, whatever word I'm trying to think of, but they can't move. And the reason we did that is that there was somebody who picked up the microphone and clocked his attorney and knocked him out in Union County sometimes. So that's the reason we did that. But the system was so poor that you had, you know, people sitting on other end of the seats had to kind of, you know, get up on their haunches and kind of speak up into the microphone. And it was very, very clumsy, and the system itself didn't work. So they have been able to hear us. And Terry is not, you don't have a microphone on your
No, I
side
do
there.
not have a
So
microphone.
the sound system has been able to pick up what she has said, where she is positioned, so that they can hear it over there. And it eliminates the, what'd you say? Huh? What? So that is really, from my perspective, as big an advance in the system as the picture quality.
You have to remember, the sound system was installed in 1990 when you walked in here, Judge? And we hadn't changed it since 1990. So it really, that was a necessary upgrade that we really, really needed to do in here. And it is, it's 180% better for our sound quality. So that is a major plus. Do you have anything else, Cindy or Deb, that you wanted to tell us?
No, I think we're good.
You ready to be released?
It's perfect.
Thank you very much, ladies. We appreciate all your help with this.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You can go ahead and shut them down. So that's what we do for our video conferencing with our prisoners. That's the future of what we're going to do with our video conferencing with folks in Winnebago Mental Health or in other facilities. So, and then you got to see at the end, Joyce, the 4 screens. That's what they saw from us. They saw all of you, these 2 council tables, the judge, and the witness stand. So you got to kind of quickly see what they were seeing on our end. So the next step that we faced with the audio and the video content was to be able to do displays for our councils. So we added some connections, and Brent knows more about this and Cindy than I do, but it's HDMI and VGI connections. I've learned a lot more than I ever really thought I would. Lots of times we have counsel now come in with their laptops and they wanted to present to the court. Brent would come in for jury trials and he'd run 5 million cords and set up some TV screens, and we do a lot of jimmy rigging just to get an attorney to display. Now we don't have to do that anymore. We have their connections right here, and so we would just have them connect directly to our system. You want to go ahead and switch me to my table? And the greatest thing that we could never do before was play a squad car camera when an officer pulled someone over, but now that has changed. And your big TV.
Oh, sorry.
Now, I see you see a lot of black space, but we have to do it actual to actual, so we can't enlarge it because then it would change the. But this is obviously the back camera of the squad. And this is major for us because we could never play these before. Oh, we're gonna hit some buffering now. So this will be helpful to us because lots of times council want to play videos or something that they've taped and they want the jury to be able to see and hear. So this is a major improvement for us. They'll bring their own laptop and they'll bring their own equipment. We just go ahead now and are able to display it better for them. So that was a large improvement for us in that area. Then we added a document camera also because we constantly get requests for document cameras. Many people call them Elmos, but we call them a document camera. And so if they want to display a car accident for the jury, they can now put their piece of paper on the doc cam and display exactly what streets they're talking about and what they want the jury to see. So that's also the newest technology that we offer, and each courtroom has its own document camera to offer attorneys, but often we have several things that they wish to display to show to the jury that's on paper. So this too is another large advancement for us. The only other thing we had that displayed prior to this was an X-ray screen that was put in here in 1990. So we did remove the X-ray screens because most doctors now come with CDs. So everything in technology now, we are ready for everyone, and we are available to provide that technology. So I think between us and IS, I think it's kind of a blessing. I'm sure Brent could tell you how much of a blessing it is for him, that he doesn't have to come up and put something together for us so that attorneys can display now, because Brent did a lot of hard work on several trials to get us to be able to accommodate a lot of things we needed. So with all of this, we no longer need that. We have everything here and we're all set, ready to go. Does anybody have any questions? Great. That's all for me, unless there's any questions or concerns or.
Thank you, Judge Kirk. Thank you. Thank you. Please take your seats. Still missing a few. Here they come. Yeah. Okay, we'll resume our meeting, please. For my report, I don't have anything from the WC. As we saw, we had a true professional here today to give all the ins and outs of what's going on in the state. I do want to congratulate Don Ace and his son and Iola Junior Legion team, or Legion team, for coming down to Clintonville and getting their berth in the state of Wisconsin. I enjoyed watching them not beat my grandson's team, but that's okay. Iola was a great team and a well-coached team. I was really, really proud. Of course, I know Iola's coaches really, really well, and the core boys. So the other thing is, too, before some of you ask, I know all of us got ailments out there in some way or another, but I've been asked why I'm still limping around here, and I want to explain what's going to be happening in the next few weeks. Many of us had hip replacements, and those are simple surgeries. You should be fine in about 4 or 5 weeks, and come 4 or 5 months, I wasn't fine, and then my surgeon says you got to get to the rec center and start pushing it, so I got up to 10 miles on a bike and went on the elliptical, and then I got so I couldn't walk out of the rec center. But he says, you got to push it, because those muscles we cut right through, and you got to get them strong again. So I kept at it, and I couldn't walk. So finally, I said, something's got to be done. Well, let's inject it with cortisone, okay? And it's going to be better in about a week. That didn't help. So finally, I said, this is it, doc. So they gave me an MRI and found out I have a tendon that pulled off the hip. So they got to go in and redo the surgery, not take the hip out, but the tendon connects the muscle to the bone, and it's pulled right off the bone. So that was a problem all the way along. And I said, you know, he's a longtime surgeon. Dick Bennett is the one that sent me to him, you know, and Dick's had hips. And he says, Dick, I've been doing this surgery for a lot of years. You're only the second one this has happened to. So I will be on crutches for, they said 4 to 6 weeks after the surgery. It's going to be September 4th. I intend to make all these meetings here. I don't know if I'll be able to get up here with crutches. I have to go to school and learn how to walk on crutches. Many of you have done this, but I haven't. So I guess corporate counsel said I could sit down there at the table, you know, if that's the case. But just so you know, everything's fine. It's just they've got to cut me open again. And good luck to all of you that got some things going too, because I know some of you do. And God bless you and good luck with that. So let's go on to the ordinances and amendments to the General Code of Ordinance. Corrections to Section 10.08, 10.09, and 10.1010, regulating restaurants, hotels, motels, and tourist rooming houses, bed and breakfast establishments, vending of food facilities, public swimming pools, and water attractions, recreation and educational camps and campgrounds, tattoo and body piercing establishments, retail food establishments, manufacturing home. Is Jed here by any chance? Maybe Jed can come forth and fill us in a little bit of what's happening here, Jed.
So these were just some corrections. Earlier in the spring, we became an agent for Department of Agriculture, and we just wanted to make sure, and we were in between corporation council, so we had a chance for Diane to look through the ordinance with the updates. So we just had to insert a couple statutes to make sure our references were correct and legitimate in our ordinance. So most of the corrections in here are just insertions of the right references to a statute, primarily 97. Also a couple references to Administrative Code 75. And then there was a couple throughout, a couple spots where we had some language that we changed just to make sure everything made sense. That's what all the corrections are referring to.
Is everything in order, Attorney Molman?
It is. As Jed said, with this new responsibility with the county being delegated as the state agent, what was missing is actually the administrative code and the statute that says they can do that. So that's the primary change. And then when we were going through that, to add those sections, we just made sure that all the other statutory references were correct and code references were correct, and we found a couple of errors. So, and we also learned that swimming pools are no longer designated as swimming pools. I think there's plunge pools and wade pools and.
There's 7 or 8 different types of pools.
So that, we took swimming out just to, because there's 7 or 8 different types of pools that they would look at, so.
One other thing that was in there too was the vending. It actually had in our ordinance that we license vending machines, and we don't actually license vending machines. We have the authority to inspect them, but we don't license them, so that was a correction in there as well.
Okay, you heard the facts, people. There's a motion by Supervisor Craig for approval. There's a second by Supervisor Gerald Murphy. Any questions in discussion? Please vote. Thank you, Jed.
Thank you.
Last chance to vote. Motion carries 27-0.
Next item is item B, is amend chapter 34, 2015-587, Town of Farmington, Z-026-15, David and Sean Thole Living Trust, RR District to AW District, combination of parcels.
What this is a smaller lot that's zoned rural residential that is surrounded by a larger lot that's zoned AWT. And what they would like to do is add on to their house. And unfortunately, the adding on to their house would spill into the border between the smaller lot and the larger lot. So what they're intending on doing is combining the lots into one large lot. In order to do that, they need to be in the same zoning district. So for this process, we had to do first a comp plan amendment and a rezone. And this here is the rezone going from the rural residential to AWT.
Is there a motion for approval? There's a motion by Mr. Peterson and a second by Mr. Gerald Murphy. Questions or discussion? Please vote.
Last chance to vote. Motion carries 27-0.
The next item is C, amend chapter 34, 2015-588, Town of Wyoming, comma, Z-27-15, Radice Corporation, AR District to PVRF District, combination of parcels.
This one was found by a surveyor doing some work for the Radice Corporation. What he ended up finding was that the legal description that was written from back in the late 50s was in error and placed a small lot further up in a 40 than it was supposed to. They basically, it was just a wrong call out from the 40 corner is what it came down to. So what he's doing is putting that that parcel in the right spot, but by doing that, he's putting out 2 different zoning districts in one parcel again. So this rezone here fixes the issue, taking it from the Ag Retention District to the PVRF.
A motion by Supervisor Asen for approval. A second by Supervisor Penny. Discussion? Questions? Please vote.
Last chance to vote. Motion carries 27-0 to approve.
Our last item on 8 would be D, amend Chapter 45 Comprehensive Plan Map, Town of Farmington, Plum-07-15, Resolution number 18.
This is the comprehensive plan amendment that's associated with the David and Sean Thole Living Trust. This is to allow for the proper consistency to go from the rural residential to the AWT.
I believe this is going to be for both the next item on the resolution, A, that's right?
Yeah, it's the same,
Okay.
the resolution.
There's a motion by Supervisor Kussman and a second by Supervisor Handrick. Discussion or questions? Yes, Supervisor Pullman.
I guess I just have one question is, why do we not just expand the residential area and change it all into the agriculture and forestry type of thing?
When we worked with the town of Farmington, with they like lots that are smaller than 5 acres to be rural residential, and lots larger than that to be AWT. And by taking away the small lot, I believe the small lot on this is 2 acres, by taking away the small lot, they're going to have, because it's roughly 20 acres is what they have. So essentially, they didn't want to have a 20-acre lot zoned rural residential. And then, so the flip side to that, what they could do would be a sale exchange where they would resurvey their 2-acre rural residential lot to make it, say, a 4-acre lot. And then they would have still the smaller rural residential and the larger lot of being AWT, but that would be just a lot added expense for the landowners, of which could be easily avoided by just combining the parcel into AWT.
And that's the same with the Thole property as well?
That's right. Yep. So it just made more sense, and it followed what the long-term plan for the town of Farmington wanted. So for larger lots, they would want them to be zoned AWT. And by doing what they're doing here, they're creating a very large lot. It's roughly 20 acres.
But then the residential area is taxed differently than the AWT?
Well, the tax assessment has absolutely no bearing on the zoning. So they're still going to be taxed as for residential, the areas that are residentially used.
Any other questions or discussion? Please vote. You ready, Mary?
Now I am. Some of you might have to re-punch your.
Sorry.
McClellan? Thank you. Last chance to vote. Carried 27-0.
Next item is resolution number 19-15-16, Land and Water Conservation Department fee schedule. I think Mr. Fedwitz wanted to explain that.
Just one comment on that. Our committee just wanted to make sure that this Land and Water Committee, Conservation, was the ones that initiated this. If you look at your form, you maybe get the impression that it started with legislative, judicial, and ethics and safety, and it just happened to be the timing of events in order to get this on the agenda today, that they met prior to us on this issue, and that's why their names are on there first. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion for approval? There's a motion by Mr. Ellis and a second by Mr. Zog. Discussion. Does Brian want to address this at all, Brian?
I can if you like.
Before we vote, why don't you? We got a lot of time today.
A few more minutes,
right? Right.
This is just the second effort this year to generate some revenue for Land and Water. The first one a few months ago was related to our farmland preservation program. This fee schedule has more to do with the types of grants that we do for our normal type of cost share work, mostly with the farm community on non-point source pollution. It's somewhat consistent with a lot of other county land conservation departments have been doing over the past few years to generate some income, and that is to implement a percentage fee on the actual state cost share dollars that we're providing to these farmers. This particular fee schedule we have figured to generate about $20,000 to $25,000 for us next year. So.
Okay, any questions or discussion for him? Not, please vote. Thank you, Brian.
Last chance to vote. Motion carries 27-0.
Next item, we're going to have Heidi come up here and give us information on resolution number 2015-16. It's a contingency fund transfer, a grant module for financial management software from the finance department.
This resolution is requesting to add a grant module to our existing financial management software program. Due to the new federal regulations that I talked about during the comprehensive annual financial report, we are required to track grants at a more detailed level. And the software program will help initiate that to be a more of a efficient process than through Excel spreadsheets.
Okay, is there a motion for approval? There's a motion by Supervisor Craig and second by Supervisor Johnson. Discussion, questions? Please vote.
Last chance to vote. Motion carries 27-0 to approve.
Clerk Robbins, we have some board committee appointments.
And unappointments. The first one, the Special Highway Building Project Committee members, we had appointed the county clerk, the finance director, the Durham director, the highway commissioner, and corporation counsel to the actual committee. By doing that, that prohibits them then to get together to get fact-finding and information for the committee. So we're going to ask that we just be appointed as advisory committee members and not actual voting committee members on the special project committee.
There's a motion by Supervisor Federowitz for approval, a second by Supervisor Pullman. Any discussion or questions? Please vote. Oh, sorry.
Okay. These buttons are marvelous.
Ready?
You're just speedier than she is.
Last chance to vote. Motion carries 27-0. The next appointment would be for the City of Waupaca Tax Incremental District Number 7. Our Supervisor Sperians, being the mayor of City of Waupaca, already serves in that capacity. They have requested that either the finance director or county treasurer be appointed, and therefore Chairman Keppen would like to appoint the county treasurer to this position.
Is there a motion for approval? There's a motion by Supervisor Fleece and a second by Supervisor Zog. Questions? Please vote.
Last chance to vote. Motion carries 27-0.
Okay. Okay. Clerk Robbins has one thing to say.
One announcement is that your vouchers, you'll notice, aren't on your desk today, or your checks. They were mailed, so you should have them in the mail today when you get home.
Or next week. Could be today or next week. I want to thank all of you today for having a full house, a sellout here. We had a lot of great information from Madison and great information from East Central Wisconsin Regional Planning, and great information for those of us that didn't see the demonstration upstairs before. Very good stuff. So thanks again, and have a good weekend. And Supervisor Ason's making a motion to adjourn, and a second by Supervisor Peterson. Please vote.
Last chance. Motion carries 27-0.